Good afternoon and welcome to our Thought Leaders webinar, Digital Transformation and Innovation for Infrastructure. My name is Amanda and I'll be your host for today. Engineers Australia would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and recognises their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay our respects to them and their cultures and to elders past and present. Today's webinar is being supported by Engineers Australia's industry partner, Oracle Construction and Engineering. Oracle delivers a comprehensive cloud-based project delivery platform that asset owners and project leaders rely on for the visibility and control, connected supply chain and data security needed to drive performance and mitigate risk across their processes, projects and organisations. Their scalable solutions enable digital transformation for teams that plan, build and operate critical assets, improving efficiency, collaboration and change control across the project lifecycle. Today, we will hear from our expert panel and an insightful discussion followed by a live audience Q&A. And as always, I encourage you to send questions through to our panel via the YouTube chat box. I'd now like to welcome our moderator for today, Eloise Robinson. Eloise is a chartered civil engineer with experience in a range of digital engineering roles on road and rail infrastructure projects in Australia and the UK. As a regional digital engineering lead at WSP, Eloise works closely with clients, business leaders and project teams on digital transformation and establishing digital delivery processes. Eloise is passionate about helping the construction industry become more digitally mature and implementing ISO 19650 in the transport sector.
Thank you, Amanda. I would now like to welcome our keynote speaker and our first panelist for today, Ben van der Vende, Director, Industry Policy, Infrastructure Australia. Dr. Ben van der Vende, CPEng, has 15 years experience working in engineering, strategy and policy across various sectors including energy, resources and infrastructure, in government, academia and private heavy industry. While experienced in public policy, Ben is at heart an engineer with a Bachelor of Mechanical and Manufacturing Engineering and her PhD in Chemical Engineering. Most recently, Ben joined Infrastructure Australia as Director of Industry Policy to drive productivity in the sector by applying project management, costs and risk engineering principles in unison with strong public policy. In previous role as a management consultant for Independent Project Analysis Inc., Ben applied cost and risk engineering principles to evaluate over 40 capital projects and acted as a trusted advisor to a range of organisations, the majority being in the Fortune 500. Ben's broader experience spans the construction value chain, from working in novel low-carbon construction material supply to running a mid-sized commercial construction company. Please welcome Ben van der Vende.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Eloise. Very much looking forward to presenting to our audience an overview of Infrastructure Australia's Infrastructure Market Capacity Report, the latest of which was published in 2023, actually just before Christmas in December. But before I do that, actually, I thought for those who aren't aware of who Infrastructure Australia is, I would provide just a brief overview of who we are and what we do and what our role within the Australian government is. So we are the Australian government's expert independent infrastructure advisor. Our work covers two primary functions, first of which is the project evaluation and advice. So we assess projects of national significance or where a state or territory government is seeking Commonwealth investment of $250 million or more. Since 2016, 104 projects relating to more than $220 billion of Australian government investment have been assessed. We also manage the nation's infrastructure priority list. Our second function is to analyse data and to conduct research. So that is to better support decision-making and planning for the infrastructure sector. This work spans audits, plans, and our flagship market capacity work. Across these functions, our work aims to support the nation's economic, environmental, and social prosperity. So onto market capacity research, which I should note is a form of digitalization of data. I'm very proud to say, as a data scientist and engineer myself, I get quite excited at the fact that we have been developing this particular body of work over the last few years. So I mentioned that this is a body of work that we've developed over the last few years, the genesis of which is a March 2020 meeting of COAG, what is now National Cabinet, which tasked Infrastructure Australia with reporting on what is the nation's capacity to deliver what was even recognised then as an all-time peak in terms of public infrastructure activity. We have, as I mentioned before, just launched our third annual infrastructure market capacity report in December last year. The significant body of research for National Cabinet is where we have data sharing arrangements with states and territories on their forward infrastructure pipelines, as well as leveraging data from the private sector sources. As you can see in that chart there, essentially what we're doing is we're bringing together all the data from those states and territories, as well as the Australian pipeline investment, as I mentioned, that private sector activity, and putting it through our model to generate an aggregated view of national demand for input resources across approximately 80 resources, I dare say. So quite a high, a granular level of detail across plant, labour, equipment and materials. And when I say granular, I mean we model the demand for the number of electricians that are required to deliver construction around Australia, the number of steel erectors, for example, the amount of steel that is required. So we really do go into that level of detail, and that is through our system that we have developed. That is then used to provide a forward-looking pipeline and a forecast of those input resources. And that is ultimately used as an evidence base for governments to proactively manage their pipelines with a reference to prevailing market conditions. In other words, what our market modelling allows governments to do is to see where there would be, in a cross-jurisdictional and cross-sectoral way, particular challenges in terms of peaks in demand for particular resources, not just in terms of overall project activity. This report is one of the critical pieces of research to help us understand what is actually happening in the infrastructure sector. Before I move on, I just want to make a point there on the last step there in the chart on this particular slide, and that is that our data sharing arrangements with states and territories and data providers means that our processed data, which has been enriched, actually gets fed back to states and territories for them to enact on. So in terms of our coverage of the total construction market in Australia, our market capacity database now reflects about 74% of the total national construction demand. In other words, what this particular chart shows is that the grey area covers essentially all construction activity around Australia. And if you imagine that coloured section wasn't to exist, that entire section would be the total construction activity in Australia as defined by ABS figures. However, the coloured sections are a representative of the portion of the market that we have modelled within our system. In other words, based on a project-by-project view and a resource-by-resource view, that shows the proportion of the market that we are currently covering, which has been increasing year on year since we first started this work. The key gaps that we're currently looking to fill in that remaining 26% of total construction activity is in defence, heavy in private industry such as oil, gas and mining, as well as small-scale detached residential buildings. So now taking a bit more of a detailed look at exactly what we found in terms of what the pipeline looks like in terms of its constituents. We have found that the infrastructure and construction pipeline that we have modelled is standing at about $691 billion over the next 5 years. If we break that down even further into buildings, transport, and utilities, we call them super sectors. We can see that buildings actually account for the majority of activity around Australia at $427 billion. That's only for buildings over 35 million. So I note that we haven't yet included smaller residential construction, such as your day-to-day house construction. So that figure would increase even further with the addition of those this year. Transport is $210 billion over the next 5 years, and utilities is $53 billion, and I should add, is growing. In particular, we're seeing significant growth in clean energy infrastructure, which has actually quadrupled over the forward-looking years versus previous years. Another first for our work in 2023 as part of Market Capacity is a focus on regional hotspots. Our previous reports have identified that the majority of activity in construction happens in our capital cities. To no surprise, the majority of construction activity happens in Melbourne, Sydney, and Brisbane. However, looking outside of those major capital areas, we see a different kind of risk, and that is a high level of growth across key regions in remote areas. So we're seeing growth of an average growth of 75% across regional areas, and we've identified some top 5 regional hotspots, including Murray in New South Wales, Mid-North Coast in New South Wales, Northern Territory Outback, Central Queensland, and Riverina. Of course, this poses a different challenge to a peak in total activity because this ramp up indicates that there are not necessarily the supply chain or access to resources within those areas to support such high levels of increase in activity. So how about we go into some of these areas and see what some of the specifics are that are driving some of these increases. So firstly, if we look at Northern Territory Outback, the Northern Territory's public infrastructure pipeline has some of the highest growth in Australia. It's expected to peak in 2025. And surprisingly, the growth is highest in buildings, which is driven by an investment in residential programs. I should add and remind the audience that this does not include investment within the defence industry, where there is a lot of similar building activity. So that figure would be even higher if that were to be included, and an interesting consideration for both sectors. As of October 2023, when this data was current, there's a total shortage of over 12,500 workers across all infrastructure projects. Again, this doesn't consider the shortage that is driven by that detached residential construction that might be happening in the area as well. Occupations that are most affected from our data are civil engineers, general construction labourers, project managers, and concreters. And again, I'll add that those occupations tend to be pretty broad impacting in terms of affecting other sectors. So again, an interesting perspective in terms of identifying some of the specific challenges facing the Northern Territory. Staying up north and looking at Outback Queensland, unlike Northern Territory that we saw just before, the high level of growth is mainly driven by transport projects with a peak over the next 5-year period, actually in the current year. In southeastern Queensland, the increase in demand is actually driven by population growth. And of course, the Brisbane 2032 Olympics is going to exert even more pressure on the area. And for Queensland specifically, we have noted that access to quarries is a challenge for projects that are being delivered in regional areas because the majority of quarries are concentrated on the coastal areas of Queensland. And that, of course, has an effect, not just in terms of access to materials, but also in terms of cost of projects being delivered, where the transport costs of quarried material can be quite high. And I should note this is a particular interest because quarried materials are what you would call a low value material. So in other words, it is quite sensitive to the cost of transport. And of course, quarried material is used in the majority of construction, due simply to the fact that it is used either in road base or as an asphalt added ingredient, or of course as a base material in concrete. So it does have quite a broad impact. We've also identified that Queensland has a total shortage currently of nearly 30,000 workers across all infrastructure projects. And again, we're seeing structural engineers, general construction labourers, project managers, and plant operators mostly affected. Productivity is the other critical issue leading to constraints within the sector. Productivity levels are currently stagnating at a 30-year low. Construction productivity has not grown in step with the productivity increases that we've seen in other sectors such as manufacturing and agriculture. So we've started to look into some of the things that are driving this lack of productivity within construction. Some of the first things that we've identified are pretty obvious, but really do need quite serious attention. The first of which is a lack of diversity. Women make up only 14% of the construction industry's workforce, and that's barely shifted over the last 10 years. In 2016, it was 12%. So that 2% increase means that, hey, we might have parity by 2080, which is just unacceptable. So we really do need to do something about it. It's also worth mentioning that the latest data has been released by the Workforce Gender Equity Agency. In all industries, construction was a standout sector in terms of median total remuneration gap. It surpassed any other field. In fact, across all occupations in the construction area, men are likely to earn nearly $40,000 more than female counterparts on average per annum. Now, the reason that I've covered this productivity issue within this forum is this last point, and one of our findings is particularly relevant to our conversation today. And that is that there is a low and inconsistent take-up of new technologies, and innovation is stymied in the industry. So, for example, modern methods of construction, such as modular construction or standardization of designs, is lacking in the industry. There's also a very slow uptake of digital tools and technology to help deliver projects. So I'm really hoping that we can dive into some of those within our panel discussion today, because I really do think that there is a fantastic way to facilitate better delivery of infrastructure by better use of digital tools and technology. At the end of the day, projects are all about information development and dissemination. Ultimately, what we want to do is to make sure that the person on the ground is best informed to perform the task that they need to do to deliver the project objective that's been set right at the get-go. So just rounding out this discussion about some of the key recommendations that we have uncovered as part of our latest report. And we have made 14 recommendations to the Australian government. I should add that our recommendations are crafted to the Australian government for consideration. And we have identified 14 recommendations across 4 key areas to help address market capacity constraints. 2, advocate for the governments to continue to proactively manage their demand and to reprioritise respective pipelines, making sure that those high priority areas are addressed. 4 of our recommendations advocate for an expanding of non-labour supply, so looking at things such as quarry availability. And we have noted, for example, some great work in Victoria that has been done to address that particular issue. But we also similarly are making recommendations on how to expand the supply of steel locally and steel fabrication. And we are also we've also made recommendations on how to expand the supply of labour. Of course, there's been a lot of work done here at Engineers Australia, I should note, on maximising the availability of our migrant workforce. We all know there is a underemployment issue in terms of engineers within Australia. And finally, for our last four recommendations, advocate for improving productivity within the construction sector. Some of those I already covered in my last slide. So to that, thank you all very much for listening to my presentation, and I very much look forward to a fantastic panel discussion.
Thank you, Ben, for your presentation and insights. Looking forward to discussing that in more detail with the rest of the panel. Let me now introduce the rest of the panel that we have. So our second panelist is Daniel Meehan, Global Head of Asset Management at Arup. Daniel is an award-winning project manager with 28 years experience in asset, project, program, and design management. While originally qualified in electrical engineering, he is the first point of call whenever there is assistance needed with an asset management opportunity within the Arup Australasia region. This includes strategic, tactical, digital, and sustainable themes for infrastructure and property asset management. Daniel is on the advisory panel for NZTA for strategic and operational asset management, as well as currently on UQ's infrastructure industry advisory board and on the board of Transform Logan program being led by the Queensland Department of Communities. Thank you, Daniel. Our third panelist, Andy Lake, is COO and General Manager at Sanset. Andy is a highly experienced information manager for construction, engineering, and building technology industries, qualified in finance and engineering with a deep knowledge of the marketplace and impressive record of delivering technology solutions for more than 30 years. Andy is the COO at Sanset and the Australia-New Zealand GM. Sanset helps teams to visualize their project data with real-world context, playing a crucial part in facilitating change by simplifying complex information, making it easier for teams to spot constraints early and make better decisions easier and faster. Today, Sanset is supporting over $200 billion worth of the world's largest infrastructure projects. Welcome, Andy. Our final panelist, Roger Rulvink, is in the Asia Pacific Industry and Customer Engagement Director at Oracle. Roger is the Asia Pacific Industry Customer Engagement Director at Oracle, and in this role, he supports clients through the region in digital transformation, in planning, building, and operating the built environment. Roger has extensive management advisory experience and a passion for informed decision-making. He has experience delivering benefits to many clients from a diversified background, working across a broad range of projects, clients, and sectors. He continues to advise and support organizations in project operations through digitalization. Please welcome Roger. Our panel will now come together to kick off today's discussion. Please remember we'll be taking audience questions after the discussion and would appreciate if you could put your question in the chat box and who it is directed to, and we'll get to that later on. So to kick off this discussion, I'm going to throw this back to Ben. So Ben, thank you for your presentation again. So looking at that market capacity report released last year, one of the key recommendations relates to how organizations collect and use data to better inform decision-making, improve collaboration across portfolios, stakeholders, and jurisdictions to improve their transparency, efficiency, and financial outcomes. How can organizations build their current processes and enhance their data to add value?
Yeah, thanks, Eloise. That's a wonderful question, and one that's actually quite close at heart in terms of our experience in terms of developing our own data processes and maturity at Infrastructure Australia through the development of market capacity. I'm not sure if my message was clear at the start of that presentation, and market capacity really is a fantastic example of a digitalization tool. It is ultimately about data processing and value add. But ultimately, I believe it comes down to understanding what is the value of data. That's one of the barriers, personally, I find organizations need to overcome is what is the actual motivation for reviewing your processes to collect, store, process, understand data. And of course, in infrastructure, the end goal is to improve the delivery of infrastructure, whether it be to maximize the value of the benefits that are being delivered, or whether it is to achieve cost effectiveness in the capital delivery aspect of it as well. So in our own data maturity journey at Infrastructure Australia, we found that the first step was to just start with a minimum viable product. In other words, don't wait for your data journey to be complete. Don't expect to be mature straight up. It's essentially what's the minimum that you can work with to start exploring the value of data. And then as you exhibit that value, to just keep building on that. I might invite some of my other panelists if they want to add to my answer as well. I'm sure they've got a lot more technical experience and insights they can add to my story as well.
I'm happy to chip in if you like, Ben. I'm talking to customers almost every day on this issue, and as you pointed out, Ben, they're trying to get to a data maturity place. But what we often recommend is, do a bit of an audit on what data you have. And what they'll often find is they've got a lot of data already. They just don't quite know where it is, and they're not getting the maximum value from it. So if you can find all your current data sources, if you can surface it and make it valuable and more usable to people, that's a great place to start. So you don't have to get additional data, just get more out of the data that you've already got by sharing it and making it available to people.
Sorry, Louise, I'd like to add something as well. I think Ben and Andy have covered the processes aspect quite well. What I would suggest is, based on my experiences of facilitating and supporting similar clients, especially government clients, I think harnessing a data-driven culture is the key, so that we can train and encourage people, because that I see is a big sort of impedient in terms of adopting a data culture. So I think that's an important one, especially innovation and collaboration.
Just to add to that,
Fantastic.
sometimes there is an opportunity to, with digitalization and introducing new technologies, to think about the process itself in the first place. Why does the process exist? Why does it need to be in that particular way? Because we might find that processes are are in existence at the moment because maybe a lack of technology being available in the past. So a process has a certain number of steps to make sure that the process is being followed, the right people are informed, the right levels of authority is being made. So just going back to basics sometimes can actually kickstart this digitalization journey as well, to then use, as my colleagues have said, the benefit of the data in enhancing the processes. So taking maybe a step backwards to take 2 steps forward could be a good place to start.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. Definitely asking those questions about why those processes do exist, and looking at other questions. The report notes that the construction sector productivity has stagnated over 30 years. We can address the barriers to growth, but that will take time. Andy, in your opinion, what do you feel are some of the factors leading to this stagnation in productivity?
Yeah, I think thanks. I think we've all seen, or heard that McKinsey sort of comment that was made from some of their research back pre-COVID that, construction was second only to hunting and fishing in terms of adoption of technology. And I think historically that's been driven around the very physical nature of the industry, the heavy construction, the types of contracts that we have, and where risk is allocated, and just the general lack of investment in IT. If you compare construction to other segments, whether it's finance or health or things, traditionally there's been an underinvestment, and I think that has been the overall contributor to that stagnation and that sort of lack of increase in productivity. I mentioned COVID there just briefly. I think COVID actually, the unintended consequence is that it sort of exposed that lack of investment in some ways. And, during COVID, things like remote working and having to shut down projects, restart them and things, and sequencing of things all changed. And I think coming out of COVID, I'm seeing some positive indicators that that's starting to change.
Fantastic.
Just to add to that,
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to add to that, Eloise. What Andy's saying is right, but I think Ben made a valid point that came out of the research as well. It's talking about we haven't really adopted modern methods of construction. So why is productivity stagnated? It's simply an equation of available materials, resources, and how much people can do within the hours of the day. And because we still dig a hole to put concrete in, to then lay bricks on top of that to build a building kind of scenario. We haven't looked at how we can, or not wholeheartedly embrace, how maybe some of those processes are actually holding us back in terms of productivity. Added to that, the points that Andy was making around the adoption of technology and maybe helping people work smarter, faster, in other parts of tasks that sits around the actual construction. I think the combination of those two would be a great benefit to increasing the productivity of construction.
Louise, can I add a few things? I think what Ben mentioned in his presentation was spot on. I think diversity is, one of the key elements, but I think I would just say it's not just gender diversity, it's cultural diversity as well. I think somebody mentioned, one of my colleagues mentioned the COVID. I think because of COVID, we had to suffer a lot because of the skill shortages, because of migration, skill migration issues, people not being able to travel across borders internationally as well. I think overall, the industry is quite fragmented with small and big players. I think there's a lot of talk of innovation, but not actual innovation. I think there's risk aversion to adopt innovation and technology, and that's coming from the private industry as well as clients as well. I think the size of the projects is increasing, so I think the complexity is increasing. And one of the areas that I am very passionate about because of my subject matter expertise is focus on whole of life cycle approach, because currently we are just building. We're not looking at how we are going to manage in terms of long term. How are we going to manage these assets?
Can I chip in as well? This is a fantastic topic, and I've just heard so many keywords that have absolutely piqued my interest. First of which is risk. The second of which is culture. And to me, the issue of a lack of diversity and the issue of a lack of innovation are actually related to culture, and related by way of risk. So there's a poor culture within the construction industry that's well established. But I believe that there's also, as a symptom of that poor culture, there's poor practice of trying to transfer the risk downhill, and we see that in all manners of contracting, even from subcontractors to material suppliers, from contractors to subcontractors, etc. There's low margins in terms of things can be quite fragile. Let alone, to Daniel's note there about projects getting bigger. The bigger projects are, obviously, it's like a house of cards. There are more things to go wrong. Therefore, the projects are more fragile themselves. So what I'm trying to get at is we've got this combination of projects which are by nature more risky in terms of their scope and the way that they're being delivered. You've got a culture in terms of risk transference, in terms of like a dog-eat-dog kind of world where you're just trying to defend your own territory. And in my own personal experience, I see it as a massive barrier in terms of the incentive for innovation just isn't there for most discrete components of the supply chain, the value chain in construction. And as part of an exercise that we did 2 years ago now, when we were studying the uptake of recycled materials at Infrastructure Australia, what we identified was the value chain end to end is so large and so complex, yet there are discrete issues at every step of the way. And really, to challenge the status quo and to innovate, you need the entire value chain to be aware of the issues at either end. And that is a massive challenge when you do have that cultural issue combined with it as well.
And so do you think, the innovation, if the industry does embrace innovation, that's going to be sufficient to address a shortfall we have in full-time workers that we have? The report notes almost 230,000 infrastructure workers. We have a shortfall of that number. Do you think embracing innovation tools can alleviate all of that or most of that impact?
Look, I'd be very hesitant to call it a panacea, that it's going to solve all our problems, which is something I think it's almost a curse in trying to convince people to digitize, because you do have some peddlers out there who will tell them that it'll make them coffee in the morning, right? It's just a joke, but ultimately, it's digitalization and data on its own will not solve all our problems. But what it needs to it needs to be delivered as part of an overall view of reform to the construction industry. And I do really believe that it's a fantastic way to facilitate that reform, but on its own, it certainly wouldn't solve all our problems. That being said, if we can improve productivity, of course, that means that we're doing more with less. That will go a long way in terms of needing less resources to deliver the same scope. Digitalisation obviously will also play a part in, Daniel mentioned there before, looking at things in terms of the entire life cycle of infrastructure. So we will be better informed in understanding what we need to build, not just how we build it. So I do believe overall, yes, it will help address the problem, but there's a lot of work that we need to do alongside it to help enable that.
Yeah, I was just going to chip in and totally agree, Ben. And this is the one that frightens me, I think, the most. I think, if we link that shortage of capacity into some of the larger goals that we have as a nation in terms of net zero and our ability to deliver on the once in a generation new transmission renewable energy targets and how to, meet that. And also, the high contribution of infrastructure to the carbon generation anyway, I think about 70%, the flow on impact of this is, quite incredible.
I'm just going to mention, Louise, I think the points that Ben and Andy made, excellent. I think short answer is yes, it will affect the ability of the organizations. In my view, and with my experience of running similar programs, transformation programs and implementation of asset management programs are long-term initiatives, and you need ownership from employees to be able to effectively and successfully do it. So you can't do that by using part-time staff. And if you use existing staff, you're gonna overburden them and overload them, and they'll burn out. And that will result in increased rework, increased cost. So definitely we need the and that needs to come from the government. How do the overall skill migration provides us the opportunity to be able to get people who already have the capability and capacity. We just have to get them sort of trained in the local standards and get them going on serious projects like digital transformation and implementation of asset management frameworks.
Yeah, that's a great point. Roger, I'm sure you've got some thoughts on how tools can support innovation within infrastructure developments. Do you want to share any of those thoughts?
Yeah, I can. I mean, it links to the points that my colleagues are making, and the question we were answering before is like the skill shortage is also partly that result of hardly any projects run to time, hardly any projects run to budget. That eats up resources, that eats up time of people who are longer committed um, to projects, who are making projects larger. So overall, that comes down to using maybe some technology tools to think about project controls. How do you control a project? How do we anticipate these things coming up? Can we use the technology that is now available to look down the road and preempt things that are going to happen or likely to happen and take a course direction to avert that from happening and thereby keeping our projects on track? But it requires us to looking at, I think, more than just the age-old and traditional time, cost, and scope to determine the quality of a project. I think we need to broaden that, and based on what Andy was saying, we've got some sustainability goals to meet. Maybe we should have add sustainability to one of the levers that allows us to control a project, or add risk and resources. Certainly, we just talked about skill shortages. Maybe we need to talk about those things as levers for project controls. And if we apply them as a lever to project control during the delivery of a project, that also means we can start using them by what we learn and by looking at the data to use them as indicators to plan a project. And if we start using those same things like time, cost, or budget, scope of a project, and add to that risk, resources, and sustainability as early indicators of how we plan a project and how we determine a project to be successful, that might go some way to using the tools that are currently available to help us be in better control of projects and maybe improve productivity. And maybe with that, as Ben was saying, do more with the same level of resources and start eating away at that skill shortage gap that we've got.
Can I add my 2 cents, because this is a topic of great interest to me. Anything that mentions control gets me quite excited as a cost engineer. So yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, Roger. I completely agree. Traditionally, we tend to only look at projects in terms of the outputs. So taking inspiration from the manufacturing sector, where they use something called statistical quality control, you can look at projects in the same sort of fashion, where your outputs are indeed those things such as the quality of the asset that's being delivered, the cost, the schedule, sustainability might even be an output. But as you say, the Roger, I think it's kind of one-dimensional if we only look at that part of the equation without considering the inputs. And risk absolutely is something to consider at the input, but exactly how we define risk and what actually affects the risk of a project, I think it's very useful to start looking into some of the more detailed inputs that go into a project. So things such as the quality of your front-end engineering design or your front-end loading. Yeah, even, we hear time and time again that projects blow their budget because there was insufficient, there were surprises in the geotechnical there was surprises in the geotech. So in other words, when they actually went to construct the asset, there was something in the soils or the load-bearing capacity or hydrology, etc. That was a surprise. But then if you actually do a bit of deeper digging, excuse the pun, you'll find that there was just insufficient geotech studies done at the front end. So things like that, I think, are really worth uncovering in terms of what are the inputs from a control perspective that we can learn from. And this is where I think digital and data tools are a fantastic way to start studying projects and actually uncovering what are the things that we tend to do well, what are the things that we need to improve on in terms of the inputs to projects, so that we can hit those goals that you mentioned there. So anyway, I think this is really an exciting space for digital tools. We may even get like a model predictive control happening here for projects. Who knows?
Couldn't agree more.
That's a great point, Ben. looking ahead, what do we see as the key milestones achieving vision of a more data-centric and digitally mature infrastructure sector? Does anyone particularly want to answer that one?
I'm happy to kick off. So, there was a mention there by Daniel about culture, data culture. Again, what a fantastic, idea to actually treat a data transition as part of a culture. We know from studies time and time again that workplaces that are successful in safety, it's because they've got a strong safety culture that's driven from the top down. Again, my personal experience here at Infrastructure Australia, we underwent a transformation to be a data-driven organization, but it wasn't by accident. It was led absolutely top down with a strategy behind it to support it. So I would say for me, a milestone would be to start seeing data become part of everyday culture within the sector.
100%. I was going to say that, that milestone of being a digital first culture led by the top. Absolutely agree. And that safety culture one's a great example.
Yes, absolutely agree. Daniel, in your role in asset management at Arup, what are you seeing either internally or with your clients? Do you think that embedding data into the culture is something that may happen?
I think it's still early days, to be honest, Louise, but I think over time it will happen. It needs the support and push from the top leadership. It needs proper cultural change practitioners to support organizations with that. But I think over time it will happen. So it's not far away. There needs to be proper push happening to achieve it and have the right practitioners. It can't just be anyone, say, in the digital team trying to run that cultural change program. It has to be done by proper trained practitioners.
Yeah,
Just to
that's a
add,
good
just
point.
to add to that, sorry, Eloise. Just to add to that, I mean, we're talking a lot about introducing technology and data and benefiting from that here, but as Ben was alluding to earlier, it doesn't stand by its own right. The tools that are available in the market are nothing more than tools, and we know the age-old adage: if you put the wrong data in, the wrong answer comes out of your tool as well. Particularly in digital, what we're talking about. So it always has to be a mix between people, processes, and the technology. It's a three-legged stool, and it can't stand with any one of the other two legs or any one of the other legs missing. It needs to be balanced, and that's where the drive comes from. And that's a big change management exercise. It's nothing to do with can we switch on computers or are we willing to buy more technology or adopt it more. It has to be a point of people, process, and technology, and they all need to be in balance.
Can I just quickly support your point there, Roger, which is that Primavera P6 has had resource loading and networking capability for a very long time. Yet I don't know that all projects necessarily use it by default. So I think, to support your point, there's this tool that has been available for, you'd be able to answer it better than I can, but certainly at least 10 to 20 years. Yet it is not something that is being taken up by default in terms of the tool. So completely agree. It is more than just having those tools available. It is in terms of people recognizing the value that they deliver and then understanding how to use it.
Yeah.
And do you think if as an industry, we can address some of these barriers, that we might be in a better position to deal with future challenges and emerging technology, that this transformation might get our industry to a better position? Andy, what are your thoughts on that one?
Absolutely. I think, that changing the culture and getting the building blocks right. Yes, we've got the technology capabilities, but there's that governance and process piece that was just alluded to there, which is a big piece of work as well. Data custodianship, data standards, data, all that sort of thing. How do you handle that? And particularly in these large, complex projects or programs dealing with two state governments at the moment who are trying to deal this on a statewide things. And, that gated data governance policy, data strategy is a huge issue, and that if we get that right, and with the technology capability, that's a really good sound building block. We of course then need to get the skilled resources to help deliver that as well.
I just add something. I mean,
sounds like we've got a lot of opinions on this.
Yeah, of course.
I go back.
Roger, you go. No, you go first, please.
Well, I was just going to add, I think one of the challenges we see today is that we've become scared of these large data, or what repositories is probably the best word. We've all been bitten, and it's been publicized quite publicly in recent months about this data and data sharing and how is that going to happen. So a lot of the barrier is also coming from that kind of fear of what is this data? How can we use it? What happens if I give it to somebody else or give somebody else access into it? And we need to be getting better at doing that. A little plug for something else I'm involved in, but it's Search It Up, Sustainable Digitalization Project. If you want to know more, reach out on LinkedIn or something like that. But that sets some principles of how we deal with introducing new technologies that, if followed, hopefully we can alleviate some of that fear to not be so fearful of using the data and sharing it and getting the insights from it that help us move forward.
Ben, did you want to add on to that?
I was going to add something different, but just to pick up on Roger's point there, the value in data is when it is studied in aggregate. So we handle states and territories confidential data at Infrastructure Australia. So it's deeply important to us that people are comfortable with providing when they provide us data, knowing that we would never share the detailed data with anybody else. So, but that confidence took some time to develop. So it did start with, I suppose, handling data that was not so sensitive initially, and then as the maturity has developed in terms of the comfort in the relationship, that has enabled us to handle more and more secure information. But again, it comes back down to the value that is added is not an individual project's data. It is when they do come together and we see what the overall picture is that can be developed from that. And just in answer to the previous point there about how these sort of tools can help us respond better to future changes. Again, whether they are from new technologies that are being that need to be applied out of necessity, or in response to climate change. And just to quote my old boss, Ed Merrow, from way back when, he used to say that project management is the science of planning combined with the art of reacting. And where I see digital tools come in is in the science of planning. So really what we're doing is data science. And that is to better enable us to do the art of reacting, so that when things do come up that have a high level of uncertainty or are unforeseen, we don't have to sit there and worry about the basics that we should have had covered at the get-go.
That's a really good point, and I suppose that comes back to the reason for this digital transformation is the life cycle of our assets and being able to better analyze, maintain, operate them throughout that life cycle. To that point, do you think people in our industry understand where the efficiency is over a life cycle versus in sort of the design and construction? As someone that works in the design of our large infrastructure projects, we're getting increasingly mature digital requirements, adding a lot of attributes to models through design and supporting construction. Obviously the hope is that leads to efficiencies over the life cycle. Do you think that's well understood in the industry where those benefits will be?
Can I take this one? Because I come across this a lot with clients. So the simple answer is no. I think we are still very focused on the planning, design, and construction aspect. And for us, the whole of life cycle is asset management, which is sort of tagged more towards the latter side, more of a maintenance view rather than a whole of life cycle approach. So I do spend a lot of time with my clients. There is an element of educating our clients that when you consider whole of life cycle, you need to, when you're designing and constructing assets, you need to know how are you going to operate and maintain those assets, and what are the things that you need to consider early in the stage. And so look at the overall sustainability of the asset. So I think that's something that needs to be, it's happening slowly, but I think there needs a bit of a education process, I think. And we do that a lot across Arab. We bring in a lot of good practice from our global projects, and that provides the value proposition for clients to start investing into a whole of life cycle approach.
Can you just add to
Just
that,
adding on.
please?
Yeah,
I just wanted
just
to add
wanna-
that. I just want to
I was
add
just going to say,
that
just quickly going. Oh, you go, Roger. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add that fundamentally there is a challenge with the way we account for whole of life and construction. We have the capex and opex, differentiator. They are separated in almost every organization when it comes to working out which budgets go where. So once they are not so separate, maybe there is a more vested interest between the two to actually think of it more as Daniel was saying, a whole of life kind of approach. But I also think that should start always with the question is, do we actually need to build? And I don't think we're asking that question often enough. Is the need for this project truly required from a holistic, whole of life perspective, based on what we think we want to achieve with constructing this project? So that's a challenge where whole of life should maybe start there and not separate the capex and opex so black and white from one another.
I was just going to chip into what Daniel was saying before. We've traditionally seen that most of the focus and investment is on sort of detailed design, construction, and things like that. What we're actually seeing a lot now as well is more focus on even earlier stage. Social license, stakeholder engagement, optioneering. Very early stage, getting more of those things right. Reduces the problems and cost and issues and things later on.
Yeah, absolutely. That should be one of the key drivers of digital transformation. Daniel, just looking at maybe a case study or one that might come up, we've got a lot of people focused on the Olympics, the Olympic Games for 2023. How do you think this improvement to productivity and use of advanced digital tools can impact the infrastructure development for the Olympic Games? Do you think this will be a key turning point maybe for our industry?
Really good question, Louise. So thank you for that. Arup does a lot of work in Olympics, from London Olympics to so many other events that we've been involved with. And so for sure, there's no two views about digital tools being able to facilitate the advancement of productivity for Olympics. Talking to talking to BCC and state government, these games are being categorized as digital games with a huge focus on global best practice. So I think this is a really good opportunity for us to be able to initiate the right. I would use the word the right digital tool. So I think we need to understand the objectives of the Olympics, and there's a huge focus, for example, on legacy. So I think we need to understand that. But in general, I think digital twins, for example, can be used to improve the planning and designing of the venues, and also for optimizing space and resources. Robotics and drones for the construction process. I think there's a huge opportunity to use digital tools to integrate sustainable development across the different aspects of the games, including the infrastructure development. I think we can use things like much of the predictive asset management tools like Internet of Things and data analytics to specifically focus on safety and security. And I think the best thing which I like about is that and that's a focus from the government as well, to simulate the legacies from other games for other host cities, so that we can learn from that for longer term.
Yeah, and there is a big program of creating a digital twin for the Olympic Games that's underway.
Yep, I think you're spot on in that. Hopefully, it will leave a great legacy. Okay, we've got lots of questions coming in from audience members, so I might change to some of these questions now. Ben, starting with one for you, bit of a meaty one. Is bureaucracy, does it play a part in the lack of productivity and innovation? Some people in the industry feel like there's too many bureaucratic requirements.
That's such a good question. Really like it. So I'm gonna flip the term bureaucracy into process. So bureaucracy is obviously when there's process for the sake of process. But the reason I just want to focus on the process part of it is that capital projects are delivered in a linear fashion. So I mentioned before that you can essentially model them as a process of an input and an output. There isn't actually much space for iteration. I had the pleasure of a few years ago visiting Tesla as a project evaluator, trying to help them with our capital project delivery system. Of course, they're in Silicon Valley, where agile project management is nothing but the rage. And they try to apply agile project management to their capital project delivery. And I said to them, let me guess, you're installing equipment and having to rip it back out again. And they looked at me and they said, how did you know? I said, well, because you're trying to iterate through a solution when your solutions are literally set in concrete. You have to follow a linear process. So my answer to that question is bureaucracy, yes, perhaps unnecessary process sake. That would stymie any organization. But there needs to be a process to be followed that needs to be fit for purpose. So, of course, you don't want to burden, say, a small project or a small project system with something overly complex in terms of the process to be followed, in terms of the development and the delivery of the project. But, of course, there are a set of activities that do need to happen in a process fashion. So, yes, perhaps bureaucracy, where there's too much process for process sake, will stymie adoption and innovation. But there does need to be a fit for purpose level of process regardless.
Can I add to that, Eloise?
Yes, go ahead.
And I just wanted to say, like, going back to the bureaucracy and the process point that the link that Ben made, it's kind of the point I was alluding to earlier. Why is the bureaucratic process actually in existence? Is because we can't trust, or couldn't, at least in the past, that the design was done right, that it met all the requirements, and therefore somebody had to check that. So you had to submit it and then wait for that person to get to your particular design and approve it and give you planning approval to proceed. What if we turn this on its head? And what if we could use the technology that exists out there potentially now or not too far into the future to actually negate some of these bureaucratic processes? So because we do know that the design has already been checked because we filled in all the parameters that it needs to comply with, and the computer has told us where it complies and where it didn't comply during the design development process. So I think it's kind of a double-edged sword. Yes, bureaucracy may potentially stifling the innovation, but equally the innovation, if we were to truly adopt it and embrace it, might get rid of some of the bureaucracy.
That's a great point, and that leads on actually to one of our next audience questions. Hard to have an industry conversation these days without the mention of AI coming up. So you mentioned digital tools just then, may be able to help alleviate some of that stress from process. What impact more generally do you think AI will have on the industry?
Are you asking at me?
Yes.
You want to go, Roger, or I'll have you go.
I'm happy to jump in. So AI is a big scary word. Yeah. There's lots of negative press, I guess, out there, particularly around generative AI. And every warning you hear about that, please heed it, because it is a very treacherous place to be, certainly to share private information, because it's not regulated, it's not controlled by anything. You don't know where your data is going, you don't know where it's come from. The flip side of that also means, because you don't know what the source data is, it's hard to know whether to trust or not trust those kind of AI engines that may provide something. But AI is also exists at a much more local level. You can use AI on your own data sources to actually move forward. And then you know the source, you know the accuracy, and therefore you can rely and trust the outcome that comes from AI. Is AI new? No, it isn't. Is it raging in popularity? Definitely is. But the benefit of AI is that it can do so many things so much faster than any human could potentially make connections between that. And that's the point that I think it was Ben made it earlier. It's not the power of the data, isn't necessarily the value of the data, I think is what he used, isn't in the singular looking at a data set. It's the aggregation of the data sets, and that's what AI can really do. But it does come with a bunch of warnings at the moment, so to not go and throw a whole lot of your data on publicly available AI engines that may not be as secure to do that. So definitely it's going to help us if we were to embrace it, but be careful how we embrace it is, I guess, my summary of that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as a technology vendor, we're obviously looking at how to implement AI into our systems and things. And, we think it's going to have a really powerful place in particularly things like city development, precinct development, where you're looking at a whole semantic kind of view of something and be able to interrogate all that data and get better designs and more understanding of the holistic heartbeat of a city and things, and what brings all of that together. So while we have to tread gently, we're very excited about some of these possibilities.
And Andy, is that working hand in hand with Internet of Things to sort of get the sensors and do the data collection in that sort of cityscape?
Yeah, definitely. So there's the data sources are both structured and unstructured. Things like common data environments and things all have a play. All reality data has a part of this. IoT has a role to play as well. So all that data coming in together is the direction it's going in. Already is, really.
I was just going to add
something to add on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that sorry, Ben. From my own experience in Arup, we have been using AI to help some of our city and highways clients, and that's been quite useful in terms of moving from a reactive to a long-term preventative asset management approach, reducing the ratepayers' complaints, reducing safety incidents as well. So overall, it has been quite valuable for those clients from a long-term planning point of view.
I was just going to add that IoT, especially in construction, is a fantastic way to help close the loop in terms of actually collecting on the ground data. So how things have been delivered in actuality, and then using that to feed back the decisions that have been made at the front end of a project, and also to calibrate the models in terms of those, I suppose, upfront design decisions that Roger mentioned there before, in terms of some of the automations, in terms of the checks and balances. So just using those IoT sensors in construction to then validate that what you've actually delivered versus what you've planned and how you've planned to deliver it. I suppose reconciling those two, and where there are any differences, like any good control system, then learning what needs to be adjusted for next time.
Absolutely. And I think the use case, is so strong to even look at the maintenance and operation of your systems, expanding on Roger's point earlier about, whether we need to build more assets. There's been some great examples of resilience in the existing network. So, taking an existing bridge that might not have a high load rating, but it being an alternative route during flooding, and using IoT to monitor, heavy vehicles going over that, looking at where we can get more out of our existing assets and meeting, the current climate conditions and things. Definitely great to see where IoT is taking it. I've got 2 questions here which lend themselves to each other well. First is, should engineers have the skills required to implement digital transformation and innovation themselves, whether that's SQL, Power BI, etc.? And also, how do we address the trope of technology will steal our jobs? So what sort of skill sets do you think people in our industry need regarding digital transformation going forward?
I'm happy to jump in here. Do engineers need IT skills to be coding and developing and writing software? No. Do you need high-level IT skills and knowledge to implement and drive digitization? No. I'm the living proof of that. I'm not a technician. I know nothing about IT any more than any average person does. I can switch on my computer. I know how to use my mobile phone, and that's about it. I can restart it, and that's about it. And anything beyond that, I'll go and ask a specialist. Now, do specialists need these skills? Yes. And this is where maybe the rub comes in. We have IT specialists who aren't necessarily knowledgeable about our industries and the jobs that we do. We have people in industry who know about the industry but don't know about the IT. And then overarching on that, we have people or have a need for those change management skills. So what skills do you need? I don't think it's the technology skills that you need. It's the ability, the skills to be able to stand back and ask the questions, why? Why are we doing it? Does this make sense? Is this logical to do? Does this fit with what I'm doing? Should I ask somebody else to actually look at this and use their expertise to see if this makes sense? And it all comes back to, lights just went out. It all comes back to the point that Ben was making earlier on, is around the, do you understand the value of the data in the first place? And if you understand that, or conversely, if you understand the value of the problem that you're trying to solve with technology, maybe you don't need those IT skills, but you need more of a business skill, a facilitation skill, a critical analysis, a critical review kind of skill set rather than engineering. And I forgot the second part of the question, so I'll open it up to my colleagues first to answer that one, because I can't remember the second question.
I'm happy to chip in. I suppose I'm a bit biased because I like mucking around with a bit of programming. But yeah, I would by no stretch call myself a competent programmer. I tend to Google things more than anything else, and just tend to copy other people's code. But the point I'm trying to make is, I don't think it necessarily hurts for engineers to have an interest in these particular skill sets, at the very least in terms of understanding the broad concepts, so that when we do apply it in our everyday work, we know what we're dealing with, we know what we're asking for. Engineering at the end of the day is an applied science. So at university, we all have to study mathematics, we all have to study physics. I just see it as just another example of that, where, yeah, we might not be mathematicians or physicists, but we need to understand the concepts such that we can apply it in our everyday lives. So, yeah, I don't necessarily think we have to be able to do the programming ourselves. We can leave that to the experts. But just in terms of the overall functionality of these of data science at the end of the day, and these particular tools that are mentioned in the question, I don't think it hurts to at least have a broad understanding of how they work.
Fantastic. And I suppose following on from that, the data requirements are increasing, as our asset owners are becoming more and more mature, and even our contractors building these projects are working out what data can help them. Do you think there's a risk in the industry, that people in different organizations are siloing the groups responsible for producing, validating, and using that data, that it's becoming a very small subset, and maybe the wider engineering, designers, asset owner organizations possibly aren't engaging and understanding that data, what's being produced and how it can be used?
I'll take that one if you like, because it's something that we're dealing with on a daily basis in CMSAT, and that the siloed data is a real issue, and there's been big investment by specialist people with their specialist tools into creating that data for sometimes one specific need. Then that data gets lost and the information is lost, and there's little focus and investment on servicing that data so the right information gets to everyone who needs it. And I think it's a real key area that can be focused on and get huge amount of value quickly.
Also, just add to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. It's also, in case we don't know what we don't know, we potentially are very limited in our thinking about what is the data able to help us with. As Andy was saying, it's like, well, we've created this data set to solve a particular problem or to answer a particular question, and that has therefore satisfied the investment or the effort required to do that. But now that we've solved that, what else could we do with it? And we're not necessarily doing a lot of that thinking. I don't see a lot of that thinking. I see people being very binary, maybe that's a wrong term to use, but very, very single viewed as to where to touch and look at the technology, and not look at the connections between the connections, and digging a bit deeper and challenging themselves to actually think about, what if I could connect my weather data to my cost data on a project? Would that tell me anything if I look back and if I look forward? Now, I don't think we are necessarily creative enough at the moment to even start those processes. We're not thinking about that because we don't know what we don't know, and in that respect, we're very much at the start of our collective data and digitalization journey in construction.
Totally agree, Roger, and that's sort of where we're looking at sort of bringing those data, all those separate data together in one place, and the power of actually seeing those discrete data sources operating together. The decisions you can make is game changing. The better decisions.
I'd like to add something, especially from an asset management point of view. What I'm finding is that there's a lot of course, a lot of the data sources are very siloed, but there's a lot of garbage in and garbage out as well. For some assets, there's too much data. For other assets, there is very little data. And what we are doing is that we are being very tactical about this. I think we need to be a bit strategic, and first of all, look at why do we need the data? What are the objectives of it? And how are we going to use these objectives to actually prioritize the data? Because that's how we can achieve efficiency, cost saving. So I think the strategic element needs to be there. And I know that a lot of the clients have started writing digital strategies and all that, but I think it's more of a tick box exercise. I think that needs to be implemented in a real way.
I like that point,
Fantastic
Daniel.
response.
Very good.
I was just going to say, and this is probably one that you can answer, Roger, but do you think the tools are there to be able to allow clients to use all this data in the way that the industry is probably expecting they will be, sort of manage and operate assets?
Well, I think Ben already answered part of that question earlier. Are the tools there? Yes, the tools are there if we only were to use them to their full capacity and capability to do things with. But it's not necessarily whether we need new tools or many more tools. We need to overcome some barriers. Andy was referring to data silos and trying to bring them together. So we have lots of point solutions, tools that solve particular problems, bringing them together in some form of platform makes that a lot easier to deal with and get the data. But Daniel made a very good point, is that you need to be able to trust the data. You need to be able to know that that is correct. And then it comes down to, do you really need the data, like what Daniel was just referring to? And I think we are currently in a post BIM hype, if you like, where the BIM is very much established now. And as a result of that, we got to, particularly to asset managers, to say, like, hey, what do you want? We've designed and built this building. We've got this fancy new model digital twin with all this data in. What do you want? And asset and facilities managers have turned around and said, just give me everything, because I don't actually know what to ask for. And it's because of what Daniel was referring to. It's like, what do you need the data to do? Now, we could look at tools, or not tools, techniques like, for example, advanced works packaging, which is largely based around designing and engineering and packaging that up efficiently to get to an outcome in the most efficient way. It's kind of using lean in construction, if you like. But we should maybe take that one step further and say, what is the data that we actually need to have access to in operation to make the right decisions from a whole of life perspective for this particular asset? And how do we get that data? And what do we need to install? And what needs to be inputted from a design and construction process to start with? And what do we need to monitor and manage over the life of the asset in operations and maintenance to actually get to that point? And maybe we should start there. Maybe the old adage of start with the end in mind is maybe the best place to start. Do we need more tools? We'll get more tools. There's so much happening out there. Can we do a lot with the tools that we've got? Definitely. Are we using them to their full capacity? Definitely not. So I wouldn't necessarily look so much for what's the next iteration or what's the next trend. Look at what you've got, look what you can do with that, and think about that. Start with the end in mind, like Daniel was saying. What is the data? What do you need it to do? And how will that help you?
Is that something, Ben, that you'd agree with?
100%. Yeah, no, I would say start at the end. But also there was a point made earlier, which is start with what you have. So it is actually quite astounding how much data most organizations have, and they just don't even know it. And so I would start by looking at what you have, looking at what the future value of processing that data would be. And rather than necessarily looking for, what new tool you can apply, is see what you already have at hand. And yeah, in terms of what's new, the next, I suppose what's to come next. There's obviously a great opportunity for artificial intelligence in this space, simply to reduce the workload of processing large amounts of data. Again, there was a comment made about there is the fear of trusting models because you don't know what data it's been trained on. But again, there was a comment made there that there is the ability to use artificial intelligence to train artificial intelligence on your own data. And that's particularly useful where you have large amounts of unstructured data, like lots of project reports that are written in all different formats with free text, etc. Artificial intelligence, in terms of large language models, is a great application of trying to extract valuable structured data from there.
Yeah, absolutely agree. We might just finish with one more question or one more comment, which I suppose is, if you had one message that people should take back from today's session into their organization about digital transformation and the value of data, what would that be, sort of summed up into 1 or 2 sentences? So Ben, we might start with you.
Ah, geez, I feel like I've been doing doing too much talking. That's why I'm consciously trying to stay quiet. Look, for me, it's not just applicable to digitalization. It's actually broadly applicable in terms of innovating the sector, and that is to be brave. So, do be brave in whatever space you are in terms of the value chain of the sector. Be brave to innovate. Be brave to make decisions that would challenge the status quo. And even if that means starting small, just take that first leap.
Thank you.
And so I
Andy,
just
do you want to give your
carrying on
takeaway?
from that, because it connects with what Ben was saying. Yeah, don't be afraid to try something. Start small, fail fast if it doesn't work. From a vendor perspective, lean on your vendor for support. Vendors have a huge ability to support. So the 3 key things we say with engaging with a technology vendor is find an internal champion. You've got to have a strong internal champion, at a senior level, who's passionate and wants to really drive things forward. Vendor support, and measure success. Make sure you know what you're trying to achieve and be able to measure it, and you'll have a much greater chance of success with those 3 things.
Thanks, Andy. Roger, your takeaway message?
Actually, probably a combination between what Ben and Andy are saying. Rather than just being brave, like Ben was saying, I'll add to that, be creative as well. Try to think outside of the normal parameters that you are looking at, because that's where you'll find the nuggets to really take yourself forward. But equally, like Andy was saying at the end, not only measure but celebrate your successes, talk about them, publish them, shout them from the rooftops, particularly within your own organization, because it will get other people thinking, get other people on there. And what you need to be successful in this space in digitalization is not only the one champion, but you need that one champion to start create a movement within your organization. If that movement creates momentum, you can go from strength to strength.
Absolutely agree with that. Daniel, your message?
I think very similar to my colleagues, but I would directly address the CEOs and the top leadership in organization. I think they need to invest in digitization, and it's not a easy process. It's not just the introduction of processes and systems; it's the cultural change aspect as well. So I think they need to hang on and persevere. I think that's my message to the industry as well.
Fantastic. All right. Well, that's been a fantastic conversation today. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. Please join me again in thanking Ben, Roger, Daniel, and Andy for their time and input. I would like to thank Engineers Australia and its industry partner, Oracle Construction and Engineering, for their support in hosting this webinar today. And there is a short feedback form which is linked in the description box below, so please do take time to complete that. And thank you everyone for joining us today.